On the way home, would like to acknowledge the original stewards of whose lands this podcast is recorded on. In York Region, we recognize we're on the traditional territories of the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe peoples, and that this is the treaty lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit. In Vancouver, we acknowledge that we are on the unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, whose presence on these lands continue to this day.
Hello, friends in housing. It's Michael Braithwaite from Blue Door. It is a pleasure to be with you again today, and we have an awesome guest. I will tell you all about him in just one moment. But first, let's talk a little bit about what's happening around this world. Hey, we are feeling the pinch in the sector. Now more than ever, there's a need for deeply affordable housing. I define affordable housing as rent geared to income. For individuals, but 30% of your household income should be spent on housing, and that includes all your utilities. That gap right now in the GTA, you're looking at just over $2,000 for a one-bedroom apartment, or household income of over $90,000 a year. You need to afford or pay that 30%. That benchmark. So the gap is huge. And to think that 15% of people living in Ontario receive Ontario Works, which is social assistance, or ODSP, which is a disability support payment. Social assistance is about $720 for a single man, and if the disability is about $1,250. So you see already a massive gap. Never mind transportation, food, in life, and other expenses that you might have, whether they be medical or other, or if you have a family. The gap is huge. So our job and our challenge is big. But here's the good thing. This is why we have this podcast too. There are amazing people all over this country, around this world, that are rising to that challenge and addressing it, coming up with innovative solutions. Today's guest is no exception to that. This podcast is brought to you by my friends at Blue Door. We're an organization up in York Region that's operated for over 40 years, serving our most vulnerable in the areas of housing, health, employment, and as well with our friends from the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. They are a national organization doing great things. Check out their website at www.caeh.ca. They're doing great work. If you want to become a Built for Zero community, and if you're not, you want this, check out their website and you can learn all about it, as well as some of the campaigns they have going on right now that push hard for affordable housing for all. So check that out. Now let's get to today's guest. Today we have with us Joshua Barndt. Now Joshua is the executive director of the Neighbourhood Land Trust. I had the great pleasure of being on a panel with him, which I didn't really belong on. I mean, we are just starting off on this path in York Region on a land trust. Blue Door is leading that work with SHS Consulting and through CAS in Toronto. We're kind of branching off of a land trust right now with some support from Habitat. But anyways, we're just starting along. But Joshua has been at this for I think about 8 years, and he's going to tell us more about his journey. But when I was talking with him, I'm like, this is someone we have to have on the podcast. Listen, we talked about innovative solutions, the solutions to affordable housing, and community land trusts definitely play a big part. So without further ado, Joshua, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Looking forward to the conversation today.
Awesome. We ask the same question of all our guests that come on, and it's a little different with similar themes to everyone, and that is, what does home mean to you?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I mean, first and foremost, I think it's a place of safety. We need to be safe from the natural elements. We live in Canada, it's freezing cold in the winter. Also, the social challenges that we experience in the city. So we need to have somewhere safe that we can go to recoup and rest and, be ready to go back into that world. Also, I mean, I think it's an anchor point for our relationship to the local community, to institutions, service providers, and government. I also think that, from the lens of the Community Land Trust, we think that, there's actually like multiple layers of home. There's not just the home where we may rest our heads, and the brick and mortar, the building or the unit, but there's also the larger geographic area that we feel safe that we feel connected to, where we feel solidarity with others, and therefore we share our lives with the people in that space. And so I think also an important aspect of home we need to think about is our community. In our context, we think of the neighborhood as a place that we also call home. Need to think about nourishing, protecting, and building.
You know, I love what you're saying there and that connection to community, and I'll tell you why. Because I and my teams in the past have failed sometimes with our housing journeys for our clients because we look at the brick and mortar piece and think it's over. If we don't connect them to community, what we find is they feel they don't belong, and they may end up back at emergency housing because they had built a community there, right? So a large part of housing someone is community, and you pointed that out. It's not just the bricks and mortar. So thank you for that. Now let's talk about your journey. I said you've been at the Community Land Trust piece, I believe, since 2015. This is your second role, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. But you know, you've been in this sector doing great work for a long time. Can you just kind of walk us through some of the journey, ending where in your current role?
Yeah, thanks for the question. My early career was actually not in housing. I was a community artist working on community-based mural projects. I had the privilege in my early and mid 20s to be invited to work with young people in the neighborhoods of Lawrence Heights and Alexandra Park in Toronto. These are public housing neighborhoods where the majority of the housing in those communities are owned by the Public Housing Authority, Toronto Community Housing. And at the time when I was brought in to produce collaborative mural art, public art with youth, those communities were at different stages of what we call revitalization, which was a top-down process of redeveloping those community assets, which had been historically been 100% public housing, and those neighborhoods were being redeveloped to have a mix of housing in the context of those two communities, in order to afford the replacement of some older public housing. The development proposal or strategy was a public-private partnership with developers where 2 to 3 times more condos would be built on the same site as the replacement social housing or public housing buildings, and the profit generated from the private housing, condos and rental, would subsidize the development or replacement of the public housing units. And in that experience, in working with youth, trying to understand the redevelopment schemes and participate in community consultation activity led by TCH and the city, I often experienced that youth and other community members were critical of the process and specifically the actual macro development strategy. And they were given opportunities in these consultations to comment on design elements or social development plans, but they were never given the agency to actually talk about what the development strategy should be overall. You know, the possibility of developing co-op housing instead of public housing, the possibility of developing new infrastructure for community governance that would allow the public housing tenants to have agency in the future. And tenants were really concerned that over time, as their neighborhoods became dominantly housed, and their neighborhoods would dominantly house private market tenants and condo owners, that their agency as working class people would be diminished in that process. And I was engaged as an artist, and through the process, I started to be frustrated that they were, art was being used as a way to rationalize the development process that many people were critical of. So I decided to stop being an artist and go get some skills that would allow me to participate in more equitable development processes. And I ended up going and doing a master's and doing my master's thesis on a community organization in Lower East Side, New York, called the Cooper Square Community Land Trust. And they're a community that fought urban renewal in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, which was going to see a similar, demolition and redevelopment of their community. And as an alternative, they actually developed the first community-based plan to redevelop their homes, and they used that plan as an organizing strategy to force the city to implement their development plan rather than the city's development plan. And they won that battle. I mean, over multiple decades, they were able to win the ownership of the homes that they were living in, and they put those homes into a community land trust where the housing would be owned by a community organization that was democratically governed, and the housing itself would be operated by democratically governed cooperatives. And it put the residents in control of both the overall development model, but also the key decisions that would impact their lives moving forward. And I was really inspired by their tenacity, by their commitment to justice and each other, and their ability to implement like concrete community-driven solutions to housing challenges. And I thought, well, that's something I'd like to be a part of. And coincidentally, while I was in New York meeting with these historic organizers who had accomplished this major win, other community members in my home community of Parkdale in Toronto initiated a community land trust in our community. And so that's what led me to become a volunteer initially of the Parkdale Neighbourhood Land Trust, which is the organization that started our work. And then eventually I applied for a job and became a staff member. And I've been here since then, since 2015. So 8 years, we've been building this amazing community-controlled organization.
Very cool journey. And you know, as we often say on the podcast too, I mean, when we want to learn, we don't have to start from scratch. There's so many great examples all around us of people doing great work, as you mentioned in New York. Now, for people that might not be familiar with a land trust, and I often say, if you had to go into a grade 4 class and write on the board, this is a land trust. Can you talk about in general what a land trust is, and maybe some different examples of different types?
Yeah, so on a basic level, a community land trust, which the acronym is CLT, is a nonprofit organization that exists to own land and housing on behalf of a geographically defined community. And that organization purchases land or receives land through donation from the city or private individuals. And then its work is to make sure that that land is developed and or preserved for purposes that serve the community. And most community land trusts focus on affordable housing, either affordable home ownership, affordable rental, or cooperative. And one key characteristic of community land trusts is a commitment to what we call perpetual affordability. So we say, you know, we're going to never sell this land. It's going to stay a community asset permanently, and we're going to manage it in a way with a sustainable business model and a commitment to affordability that ensures that this housing stays affordable, not just for today's generations, but for future generations in perpetuity. And so that's a really defining characteristic. Another important feature of a community land trust, which I think this is distinctive to the community land trust compared to other nonprofits or co-ops who provide affordable housing, is that we have a membership that can include, and well, often includes, members in the broader community, not just professionals and or actual tenant members. So in a traditional nonprofit, board members who make decisions for the organization are often selected. There may be local community members who are professionals or just general professionals who want to contribute to the goal of the organization. In the context of our organization, all of our board members are elected from our membership, which are residents who live or work in our community. And so our board is fully made up of local residents and elected by other local residents. It's distinctive also from the co-op housing model, which, you know, I really love because of its democratic process, where in the co-op model, tenants are the member owners, and the tenants collectively make decisions about the operation. So the tenant members will elect the board of directors who get to make decisions about the homes. In the context of our organization, it's not just the tenants, but it's community members at large. So we have on our board, we have 3 types of stakeholders represented. We have our what we call core members. So those are people who live or work on the sites we own. So they have a direct interest in the buildings we own. And then we also have community members at large. So they don't actually live or work on sites that we own, but they live in the community and they know about the needs of the community by their lived experience here. They may know about needs that we're not yet meeting. And so they want the organization to grow and improve and do new things. And then in addition, we have organizational representatives from organizations that serve equity-seeking community members. So that might be the legal clinic or a supportive housing organization. And they bring the expertise of that organization in serving the specific needs of specific demographics of equity-seeking community members. And so we think that by bringing those 3 stakeholder groups together with different interests, over time, we'll be able to make the best decisions for our community that we can possibly make and we'll do that collaboratively and democratically. And so the Community Land Trust is a community-controlled democratic organization that serves the community through a democratic process that is transparent and open.
Thank you so much. That is, I think if I was in grade 4, I'd pick up on that, and that's what we want, is just to keep it simple. Now, in your case too, I mean, I think what we're seeing, one of the challenges to affordable housing is that we're losing a lot to, of course, crumbling infrastructure. Also, the private market is buying up these buildings that were generally affordable over time, and then when they're bought up, they're no longer affordable, and so it's a way, as you said, in perpetuity of keeping these affordable forever, because if they're lost to a different sector, that's not going to happen. Let's talk about your land trust. How did it come about? How many buildings now? Who does it serve? What are the future plans? What's the mandate?
Yeah, thanks so much. So, our organization was initiated back in 2015, and at that time, our community was in a sort of late stage of gentrification. We had seen property values go up, a lot increase in evictions of both tenants and commercial tenants, and with higher land values, lower profit land uses were being pushed out and being replaced by higher profit land uses. And what are those lower profit land uses? Well, those lower profit land uses are the land uses that we generally benefit from the most. So they could be spaces where nonprofits provide services to residents. They could be affordable housing. They could be locally serving businesses that provide ethnic specific foods. And so, as we were experiencing like fast-paced increasing gentrification, those types of land uses were being pushed out. And we thought, well, we need to preserve the land uses that are important, that serve communities, especially low-income, moderate and low-income peoples. And so we decided to use the land trust as a tool that actually intervenes in the land ownership. We take that land out of the private market through a purchase or donation. We preserve it in the land trust, and we can make the decision to provide that land for affordable in an affordable and equitable way. And so when we started the organization, we looked at sort of like the many ways we could intervene in our community, because we were losing housing, we were losing affordable commercial space. We ended up deciding to start our journey by trying to address a specific challenge of rooming house loss. As you mentioned, in the rental market in Toronto, prices are increasing constantly. And one of the most affordable types of rental housing that we have in our community is called a rooming house. So these were historic homes that maybe once upon a time were Victorian mansions, and they had been converted into shared accommodation where tenants were renting rooms or small bachelor units at very affordable rents. And historically, when the market was not super hot like it is today, private landlords owned those buildings and rented them to tenants at very affordable rents. And so we actually have the highest density of rooming houses in Parkdale than any other neighborhood in Toronto, with about 198 rooming houses providing about 2,700 rooms and units to people who are generally like the lowest income people living in our community. And so by 2015, and we were seeing that there was an escalation of evictions and closures of rooming houses, and this was throwing some of the most low-income residents in our community into the streets. And so we thought, like, this is a place we need to start. It seems to be where we can have the most impact. And these were also small buildings, so as a new organization, try to engage in the real estate market, and we thought dealing with a smaller project first would be beneficial to build our capacity. So our process started with first identifying that challenge. What is the local challenge that we want to deal with as a community? And we said rooming house loss and the eviction of those tenants into homelessness. We want to try to curb that and stop that. So we want to prevent homelessness for our neighbors, and we also want to preserve the affordable housing stock for current and future generations. And so the first thing we did is we said we need to actually understand what's happening in this rental submarket. We can't just say like we're going to take land out of the market. We actually have to understand how this land is, what is happening with this submarket of land ownership. And so we hired a professional planner, and we hired 6 rooming house tenants, and we went out and did a study, the Parkdale rooming house study. So we mapped all of the rooming houses. We spoke to tenants and landlords, and we were able to discover what was going on. There was a historic. We were in a historic moment where some of the older landlords who had created these rooming houses in the 70s and 80s in a very different economic moment, they were at retirement age. They were selling their buildings, and there was not a new group of owners who were interested in operating rooming houses at affordable rents. In fact, the types of purchasers who were buying rooming houses in 2015, 17, and all the way up to today are groups of investors and real estate investment trusts. And buying these properties as investments, not as affordable housing to operate themselves. And so they were purchasing the buildings, evicting, rent-evicting tenants as fast as possible, renovating the homes, and then renting them out at double or triple the rents. And so we thought, well, we can intervene by actually participating in succession planning with the older owners and bring these at-risk rooming houses into the community land trust to be improved and preserved as affordable housing. And so we started to try to buy buildings. We had about a dozen failed acquisitions in our first few years of trying to just be a community group that was trying to purchase land. It's challenging and expensive. Our first challenge that we faced was that at that time, there were no government programs that supported the acquisition of existing rental housing for conversion to affordable housing. And we thought that was very shocking. What our community needed was the preservation of our rental stock. But all the affordable housing programs that were providing funding to groups at that time were focused on new construction. And so we had to spend actually about a year undertaking advocacy to the City of Toronto and our local councillor, and we were successful in convincing them to implement a pilot project. So they made funding available for a rooming house acquisition pilot, and through that pilot, we were able to prove that with a small amount of city funds, we were able to purchase a building and improve it significantly. So our first project was a 15-unit rooming house where the units were self-contained bachelors. And it was located on a street called Maynard in South Parkdale. And we were able to purchase it with about $1.5 million in support from the City of Toronto, and then $600,000 in renovation funds provided by the province of Ontario. And we were able to complete that project in about an 8-month period. So from acquisition to completion of renovation. So we were able to show that, for actually less than $200,000 a unit, we were able to preserve affordable housing stock, permanently improve that housing, and do it faster than other affordable housing delivery models. And so we used that pilot to advocate to the city that the city should continue to support such programs through an ongoing program. And I'm happy to say that in 2021, the City of Toronto actually created a program that is called MURA, so the Multi-Unit Residential Acquisition Program. And it's an ongoing program of the City of Toronto that provides funding to nonprofits like us, as well as the city, to acquire at-risk rental stock that is currently providing affordable rental housing to low-income people. And it allows us to purchase those buildings and preserve them. And so that program is in its second year now. And I'm happy to say that actually in 2022, we were able to purchase a second building, 36-unit building on the same street, Maynard Avenue, through that MURA program. So we've been able to turn that pilot into an ongoing program where every year, hopefully, we'll be able to preserve more buildings. And again, we're really excited because through preservation, we're able to actually supply more affordable housing to our community at a very economically efficient, in a very economically efficient way. Where new construction right now is costing $300,000-$500,000 per unit in Toronto, we're able to preserve these affordable units for around $200,000 a unit, which is more economically efficient, which means we can produce more housing for our community. And so we're very excited about that. We continue to advocate for the continuation of programs like this. And unfortunately, the biggest level, at the federal level, there's still no acquisition funding. So it's one of the big gaps in the national housing strategy that we're advocating is closed as soon as possible, so that we can make these interventions in these urban neighborhoods where preservation is really very important to undertake. The last thing I should say just about our portfolio is that our model started with acquiring private rental, taking out of the market, preserving and improving those units to be able to provide that affordable housing. But we've also recently been able to utilize the community land trust model to preserve existing social housing that was at risk. So we recently became the owner of 81 single family homes and small rental buildings that had formerly been owned by Toronto Community Housing, but which Toronto Community Housing in different sort of political moments had sought to sell. And so there's a bit of a history there where the Toronto Community Housing has historically had some fiscal challenges. And about 10 years ago, when we had a more conservative mayor, there was an effort to sell some of Toronto Community Housing single family homes. Some homes were sold, but there was a major advocacy push called Not for Sale that was organized by tenants of those homes, as well as other housing advocates and progressive counselors, and stopped the sale. And then led to a process where the city has transferred the scatter home stock of Toronto Community Housing to nonprofits such as our Community Land Trust, so that we can preserve the affordability of those homes permanently. And so one thing that I should reference, because you said earlier that you define affordable housing as rent geared to income. So we're really excited that, like, in partnerships with the City of Toronto, such as the transfer of these 81 homes, those homes are all eligible for rent geared to income subsidy, and the tenants are currently in that portfolio are being referred to the housing from the City of Toronto's waiting list, and that housing is targeted for women-led households and households led by gender diverse individuals who are in need of affordable housing and will have access to these homes at rents geared to income. It's just an amazing opportunity. Like, we are so delighted to be able to have the privilege to be the stewards of these homes. Most of these are 3 to 5 bedroom homes on residential streets in downtown Toronto. These are homes which, if they weren't owned by the Community Land Trust or another social housing provider, would be unaffordable to any lower moderate income household. But instead, we're able to make these homes available to low income families, so that they can build their lives into downtown core, and so that we can maintain mixed income communities. And so it's quite a privilege. And I should say that also, and it's an important part of our model, that as a community land trust, we own and steward the property, but we're not housing providers. So in each of our projects, we partner with other expert housing providers who we lease the properties to, and those providers provide the property management and the tenant services, such as support services. And in the context of our scatter home portfolio of 81 properties, we work with the amazing feminist organization, the YWCA Toronto, who is providing incredible property management and tenant services to those households. So, one of the great things we think that the Community Land Trust brings to the sector is that we fill the gap of being an organization that's focused on developing new affordable housing projects and or preservation projects, and then providing those projects to existing capacitated nonprofit housing providers to continue to do their work to provide those services to residents. So we work through partnership and we're able to get a lot done by doing that. So today in 2023, we own in total 84 properties with 205 affordable rental units. And we have over, we believe around 500 people benefiting from the affordable homes that we own. And we're so proud of it, so very proud of it.
As you should be. That's incredible. When you think about it, in less than 8 years, those numbers are incredible. And so, listeners, just to put it in perspective, the focus right now, we hear about 150,000 homes in Ontario a year that we want to build. We hear about 3 million homes by 2030 that the federal government wants to build. It's all about new supply. But listen, we've heard numbers as high as 15, but I've recently heard for every new build, there's 13 that we lose to crumbling infrastructure, to loss to the private sector, where they're no longer affordable. These are affordable homes. And so what Joshua is talking about becomes incredibly important in maintaining forever these homes in an affordable manner. I love your partnership model too. I was going to ask you about the property management piece. You just, you beat me to it. That's so cool. And for a wonderful organization like the YWCA. And let's say it was a win-win-win for everyone. When you think about Toronto community housing, what had happened at the time too is that maintaining the cost for infrastructure to keep those houses up, but many of them had fallen behind, had not been invested in. And so it was tough for them to do that. They were facing a uphill battle. So now they've got an amazing group like yours, working with amazing partners, providing that truly affordable housing, trying to pare down that waiting list, a huge win. Now, you're doing great work. Can you talk about examples of others that are doing great around community land trust?
Yeah, so we understand that there's over 30 land trusts, somewhere between 32 and 40 community land trusts across Canada in 5 provinces and territories. And so there's quite a few really inspiring and exciting initiatives. I'm happy to be able to share a few. So one of the groups that we look up to quite a bit, and it's a more historical group. So this is a group that was actually created in the 80s and 90s by the Cooperative Housing Federation of BC, and actually, back then when they were first created, they became the owner of a number of buildings. But more recently, they've been able to grow significantly. And so if you want to look them up, they're called the Community Land Trust. And another term they use is the Community Land Trust Group of Societies. And so they operate actually in the greater Vancouver region. So they're serving a larger region, not just a neighborhood. And they're what we call a sector-based community land trust. So they are serving the co-op sector broadly. And they're being supported by a sector organization, the Federation, the Co-op Federation in BC, and they've been able to partner with the city of Vancouver on 7+ sites where they're leasing land from the city of Vancouver and developing, thousands of affordable rental units that are some are co-op, some are just rental, and then I believe now they're moving into doing some home ownership. They've also been very successful in stepping in when other co-ops are experiencing fiscal challenges, and so they will step in, bring the co-op into the community land trust, refinance, and then lead an improvement process to make sure that co-op can be sustained as affordable housing permanently. And then even most recently, they've actually been successful in acquiring larger rental sites in the market. So they're an organization that's showing that with the community land trust model, we can actually produce affordable housing that will be permanently affordable at scale. They have a development pipeline that's in the multiple thousands of units. And so it's very exciting to see their model succeed. And some interesting factors that we're looking at there is that they're able to use their portfolio scale to create efficiencies around operation, efficiencies around financing, and cross-subsidized projects, which is very exciting. And I think a really important direction for our sector, where there's a lot of social housing assets that are where over decades and decades equity has been built that can be utilized to invest in new social housing. But to be able to do that, we need very effective organizations that can have professional staff that are leading those processes in ways where risk is managed well. And they're showing that they can do that we can do that, and they're leading by example. And then there's also many startup CLTs, smaller groups that are newer, that I think are showing us other ways that CLTs can get organized. In Vancouver, also, the Hogan's Alley Society is creating a community land trust. They're operating in a part of Vancouver that was the home of a historic Black community that had been displaced by a viaduct development led by the city. And they're working now in partnership with the city to be a part of a redevelopment of that area where that viaduct is being decommissioned. And so Hogan's Alley Society, I think, is a very dynamic example of a community that has organized around a goal of racial justice and supporting the success and the continued development of the Black community in Vancouver. And so very exciting to see that. In Ontario, there's also, actually across Canada, there's multiple Indigenous-led CLTs. In Ontario, I was recently, very excited to learn about the Temescalquin District Community Land Trust, which is a project that's seeking to create Indigenous women-led land trust in the districts of Temescalquin and Cochrane. And it's being led by elders and matriarchs there who have a desire to have Indigenous-led and Indigenous-owned housing that would be focused on to serve women-led households. So very exciting to see that emerging in Ontario. There's also, elsewhere in Ontario, in Owen Sound, there's an organization called Glassworks Village Community Land Trust, and they have actually purchased 46 acres of employment and industrial lands in Owen Sound, and are working to develop a plan that would see them building a lot of sustainable housing on that property. Out in Chatham Kent, also in Ontario, Opportunities Village Community Land Trust is developing a community of homes, and they're developing a affordable home ownership model on a community land trust. And it's sort of maybe to throw back to actually some other historic community land trusts which are worth mentioning when we're thinking about home ownership. The Toronto Island Residential Land Trust is sort of like a unique municipally or like government initiated to some extent community land trust, but that has proven a model of providing more affordable housing than the market through a community land trust and a land lease on government-owned land. So I think there's some like really great examples all over the country that are showing that the community land trust can be a really powerful tool to produce and then preserve affordable rental stock, affordable home ownership, and cooperative housing assets. And so, my hope and dream is to see that community land trusts emerge in all regions of Canada and are supported by community and government to have success. Because, I think it's clear to all of us that, we need affordable housing that's not just affordable today, but that it's going to be affordable permanently and available to future generations. But we also, I think we need to think really critically about how we structure this new affordable housing to ensure that local residents have real agency in making decisions around what type of housing is built, and then also how that housing is managed over time. In many of our cities, based on the real estate boom and the way that like planning has been structured to serve the development sector, local communities and residents have been, unfortunately, extremely disempowered through traditional development processes. And the community land trust is a concrete tool to put community back in control of our housing.
It absolutely is. Now, last question of the day, lessons learned. And if you're going to give some advice to someone who's saying, hey, we want to do this, what are some tips? So lessons learned and some tips of starting up, some advice that you might give from your 8 years or so working in this field.
Yeah. So I mean, from our experience, you gotta start with who is around you. If a community knows that it has a housing need and that there's a challenge to be addressed, it can really be overwhelming to try to comprehend what it might take to create a whole new organization that's going to develop affordable housing. And real estate is complicated, so it can be quite overwhelming. So I'd advise any new group, basically, like the first step is to bring together the stakeholders who you think have a shared interest in that goal. Those stakeholders can be just residents, they can be resident groups, they can be existing organizations, maybe political representatives, but bring those people together around a table and talk about whether the community land trust is an appropriate solution. Generally, is it the right solution? That's the first conversation. If there's energy there, even a small amount of energy, what we advise is that groups will, start a committee and or just form an interim board. It's important just to get started. This type of organization takes quite a bit of time to develop, and so it's worth getting started if it's something that you want to see happen in your community. If you feel there's a gap that needs to be filled, just get it started. We have a commitment, it's community governance, which means that we are electing our board members, and so we're doing things through transparent and democratic processes. But in the early stage, when you're just starting something, like we think that it's actually okay to just start with who's there. It's sort of to some extent a necessity. So we always advise people, like, start with an interim board. Your board can just be the people who are initially interested, and that interim board will work to create the infrastructure that they can invite more people into, to develop the membership structure, and then go and recruit members. And then once you have a membership, then you can start your democratic process. So we always just recommend that people just get started with who they have initially around the table, who are willing, the people who are willing to work together towards a common goal, and take it from there. I'd also recommend that now, we're very lucky. There's now a national network called the Canadian Network of Community Land Trusts. You can go to communityland.ca to connect with it. And so it's a great resource. You can email that group if you're interested in starting a CLT and sort of get some support around some of that early process. And also just reach out to other community land trusts that are like relatively close. Like we're all other, like the other community land trusts are very interested in supporting new groups, and so more often than not, like, we're happy to jump on a Zoom call and like help talk through those early questions. The other thing I should say, which is quite important, is that if your community, if it's possible, it can be very beneficial to identify a sponsorship organization early on. So that might be like an existing supportive housing provider or an existing nonprofit who is willing to sponsor or trustee the initiative until it's ready to be an independent organization. And that can just help to sort of like minimize the administrative burden early on, and also help to access the funding that will be needed to support the development of the community land trust. But in the end, like, again, all you need to start is to get people with a common goal in a room and start talking about next steps. So I wish you all good luck, and do connect with the Canadian Network of Community Land Trusts if you are seeking to get a CLT started and would like some assistance.
Amazing. This has been the most comprehensive and quite simple, I love it, conversation around community land trusts. I think, if you're open to this, take a listen to this podcast. You'll be well on your way. So thank you for that, Joshua. Listen, if people wanted to check out your land trust, where would they go?
Yeah, so you can find out everything about our community land trust at PNLT.ca. And so that website's for the Parkdale Neighbourhood Land Trust, as well as the Neighbourhood Land Trust, which is the charitable arm of the Parkdale Neighbourhood Land Trust. So you'll see information on both organizations there. And if you're interested in learning more, just reach out. Our contact's on the website, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for the time and for lending your talent to this podcast. Amazing. Congratulations. Like monumental movement with I think 84. You said, is it 84?
84 properties in downtown Toronto owned by the Parkdale community.
Wow. Yeah. From 0 to 84 in less than 8 years. Incredible. And it was done and pushed by community. So cool. It can be done. And you're showing us how. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for all you do.
Thanks so much. Have a great day.
Man, I'm inspired by that. We're starting a community land trust, and as Joshua talked about, in York Region, we're doing this, and it's not Blue Door specific. We did what he said. We had a bunch of people around the table. It's actually started by Mayor John Taylor, in a sense, Mayor of Newmarket, who said, "Hey, if I could get some properties, what's the best way to make sure they're best use to the community and affordable housing?" And of course, that's through a community land trust. We are expanding a land trust out of the GTA called CAS, which is very exciting. So I've learned so much today. So appreciate individuals like Joshua. Like I said, when I sat on that panel with him, I thought, I need to get this guy on the show to talk more about this way of preserving and growing affordable housing. Amazing work. Hey, take a listen, share it with your friends, tell people about this podcast. The reason we do this is to create education awareness around homelessness and housing across Canada, something that's touching us all these days. So the more widely shared, the more impact we'll have. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on The Way Home.